On today's show, we're going to be talking about being playful and how that relates to education and radical innovation.
We cannot be more thrilled than to have someone that I look up to as a thought leader in education. We have with us a leader in confusion. Did I say that right?
Chief of confusion.
Chief of confusion. A pontiff of confusion. Can I raise your bar there?
No, I was thinking chief for a while.
Chief of confusion, JSB, John Seeley Brown. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
My pleasure to be here.
Would you start us off? I know you have a real kind of tendency to be thinking about play and how that really interacts within the classroom and within, not even the classroom, but all about learning. So can you talk about your perspective on play and what the importance is for that in learning?
Well, I think I can look at it two different ways. Philosophers and educators have for some time, starting with Montessori or before that even, deeply understood the role of play in terms of bolstering the imagination. And a lot of us came up through those systems. Some of the most famous people today came up through those systems, although the press doesn't seem to know that. What I find today is that the power of play and the power of imagination is now more important than ever, because we tend to focus on creativity, but I think we should be focusing on imagination, to be able to imagine something about what if. Because with the exponential world that we live in, basically we can break out of the linear progression that has always characterized the last 100 years, and we can now leap forward in almost unimaginable ways. And so the whole catch is how do you think about, what if or why not? And in fact, kids, as they enter school, are filled with those kinds of questions. And they drive most teachers crazy, because often, like, why? Why is the sky blue? Why isn't it red? Why not? It is sometimes. And, if you are, as a teacher, feel like you always have to be in control and always be the authority, sometimes these questions are incredibly technically deep and don't have kind of simple answers. But you have to be willing to say, with a kid, okay, let's play with this problem. Let's try to figure it out together. What are the resources we have at our disposal? And in fact, I think coupled with play is this whole notion of a technical term called bricolage, which says, how do I use whatever I have around me in order to make progress in solving the problem? How do I if I don't have the perfect tool to do this or the perfect book to answer this or blah, 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 how do I find a resource lying around that can be repurposed to help me progress on the task that I actually have? And if you look what Don Dewey, when these kids would build these clubhouses, they didn't have perfect tools. They made do with whatever they had at hand. The technical term is ready at hand. How do you kind of look at what's around, what's ready at hand, and how do you use that? This is what actually makes the entrepreneurial learner. I do not mean makes an entrepreneur. I mean an entrepreneurial learner. An entrepreneurial learner is someone who always has a curiosity of what's around him or her, can actually go on quests all the time, and can kind of figure out craft their own pathway through stuff. So come back to play. I mean, play kind of sometimes gives you the rules of the game, but within that space, you have to feel free to do completely new things. You have to figure out how to push the boundaries of something. You got to figure out what's permissible and what isn't. Or can I actually make a surprising move that I don't even quite know the consequence of myself? And so that ability to kind of handle the unknown is a key part of play. Now, folks of my age, you hand them a new technical device and they say, well, give me a manual. Give that same task to a 10-year-old, and they never think about asking for a manual. They'd say, blah, 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 and they would push things around. They would try things out. in order to kind of figure out what the game really was, so to speak. That's in quotes.
JSB,
so,
can you define for us what you're seeing as play and what is not play?
I think not play is what mostly happens in the classroom. Quite honestly, it basically, not play is going after very precise problems, or very careful reading assignments that are very formulaic and have very well-defined answers, where those answers are known often by the school system or the teaching system, and so on and so forth.
Is there a place for that?
At certain ages, probably. The real question is, what skills do you pick up? And I like to think about three things we have at stake here. We have knowledge, we have skills, and we have dispositions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, knowledge is what gets delivered to you, either by the teacher or by pulling it off the net. Skills you tend to pick up through apprenticeship, and it could be skills where you are apprenticed by a coach in real play or peers in doing things, but it's always involved in action. A good coach, a good apprentice, a good mentor, is fantastically important. And so most of what you guys do is great teachers is a form of mentorship. You can listen and see, but doesn't quite yet see, and can kind of create a micro epiphany for that kid at the right moment. And then I think dispositions, really has to do with kind of a questioning disposition in terms of, how do I kind of think, well, what's around the corner? How do I explore that on my own? That often comes up most in play, but dispositions are cultivated. You don't teach disposition, you cultivate a disposition. And so kind of the social space of a classroom, or the social space of a playground, or going on a field trip, this is where dispositions start to get cultivated. We tend to test for knowledge and regurgitation. Sometimes we look at skills, but those are usually formulaic skills. Almost never do you give a student a problem that they don't know how to do, and watch how they kind of work with that. And dispositions, is the real essence of what happens in social and physical spaces. I think that, it's obvious that mentorship plays a role in both skills and cultivation. But now think about peer mentorship. Why was the one-room school class so powerful 100 years ago? It's because the teacher became an orchestrator and could orchestrate, different groups of kids, either learning from other kids and or turning around and teaching and helping other kids. And so you would spend some time learning from kids, and you spend some time helping. And so that ability to be both sides of the equation, both mentored and reverse mentored. And so we don't take seriously reverse mentorship. In fact, the irony I tend to talk to, usually top level, moderately old, I must say, corporate executives, and I try to get them to see something, and they're getting more and more frustrated. I say, okay, stop. Here's what we're going to do. Go home tonight, and hopefully you have a teenager. Pose that question to your teenager, and come in back tomorrow and tell me what came from that conversation. And they do that. Say, oh my God, I had no idea. My son didn't know, but that didn't faze him one iota. And in some sense, he moves into the meta platform of playing with an idea. Throughout the poet, how do you find the perfect phrase? That's a form of play. It's not the play in the playground, but it's a play of an idea space. Does that sound quite right? You know, teachers say, well, getting kids interested in poetry, impossible. I say, well, what about rap music? Rap music, you know, musicians did, have a fantastic attunement. Does that phrase turn? Does that phrase evoke? And so these kids are constantly looking at moves that they can make that evoke other things. That being playful as well. Look at the surfers out here right now. I'm in Maui at the moment. Their willingness to be on the edge of the wave and play with that wave. It's a conversation with the wave. They're having a conversation with matter. Matter in motion. So this whole notion of learning how to have a conversation with either kids around you or with a problem space or a task or a piece of poetry. This is all really being playful. There's no formula. It's not formulaic. It's not necessarily clear that there is an answer. In poetry, don't tell me that there is an answer, but rather how does it feel? You're moving into that space or not, okay? And that's what's so beautiful. If I give a kid a math problem in school, there is an answer. Is it right? You never ask, is the poem right? Okay? And so that sense of how do you play with the ill-defined? How do you have conversations with things around you, not just people? And, so I watch skateboarders. They're having a conversation with the skateboard. They may not say it that way, although really good surfers out here right now, if I ask them, they know that they're playing with the wave. And they're reading it in their body, in their mind, often inchoately because they respond so quickly. But it's a very rich act of imagination that comes from this deep sensibility to listen and have a conversation in action. Is knowing in action, is imagining in action, and it's learning in action. That's where it really is. I'm fond of saying that, if I can create the stage for a kid to have an epiphany, that epiphany will stay with him or her for life. And so, I do some other work where we actually are building systems that are extreme coaching systems that for people I don't want to talk about. It's amazing that in our system, if we have just one interaction every hour, and it's the right interaction, hey, we got it, okay? As opposed to constantly blabbing at the mouth, like I'm doing now.
Well, and I think I think teachers would have described that epiphany moment as maybe an aha moment. That's kind of like a common phrase you'd find among teachers. Is I love that aha moment from a student. And it really is those mini epiphanies that kids can have within the classroom structure.
Absolutely, and that's the magic moment. And one of the things you have to ask, if you have teachers who love creating the aha moments, then how do they take training kids to do standardized testing? What? Those are two orthogonal worlds. How to create a test on aha moments.
Yeah. Tim, did you want to ask a question? I know you had something that you wanted to ask, SB.
Yeah, can you talk to us a little bit about, in light of your philosophy on education, what do you see that we need to start doing in our colleges to incorporate play and imagination? And when I went to school, it was listen to the teacher talk, take notes, study, write a paper, take a test, regurgitate the information. I'm not sure if classrooms have changed that much in colleges today, but how should they change?
Well, first of all, a micro start down that path is something called flipped instruction. And flipped instruction is where the kids do the reading, watch the videos, outside. And then they come into their class to collaboratively solve our problems. Okay, and so that's a micro step toward that. I think that's just a useful but micro step. I actually used to be a professor up the road from you and a little bit south of you at UC Irvine. One of my most popular classes I taught was thinking about thinking. And I live on a beach, and I drove into Irvine every day, and I would look for something to happen on the way in that 35, 40-minute drive. And I would take that moment and I'd bring it to the class and say, for the next 40 minutes, we're going to deconstruct what this moment was. We're going to kind of thinking about that. And, we can play with it. And I will start to play, and then we'll kind of do it as a class phenomenon. Okay? And they began to realize that there was nothing pre-programmed. I never knew when I got in the car what I would choose or what would happen to me on the way to class. On the way to the forum, something happened. Okay, my class was on the way to the forum. We're going to talk about it. Okay, and these kids kind of their eyes would go big. They said, "I mean, that's amazing. I mean, like the interesting ways that you can turn things inside out. You can turn them around. You can ask opposite." And so it's a very form for both me, and it was a total first. I mean, it was I did that, but it hadn't really caught on. It was very. My slides. I gave a talk last week at the Provost Retreat at USC, and one of the things I proposed is you tend to have mostly lectures, and then you have labs or studios afterwards that put into play, you put into action what you just learned. Well, what about reversing the whole thing? Can we turn the system inside out? That basically we engage, as John Dewey would have said, in trying to do something, to explore something collectively, and then or as a team. And then when you get stuck, what do? You start pulling information in. You start asking other people around you, and so on and so forth. And so it's a whole sense of kind of inverting the whole system. So you look at the opportunity to get stuck, and then where do you pull things into action when you get stuck? And in fact, one of the slides I have is what happens if we turn the entire university inside out as a thought experiment. And so, basically everyone was engaged in research. But students along with the faculty. So you had a kind of an apprenticeship model.
And
but the whole purpose to have students get lost and then be able to go out and find their way. How do they kind of craft their own pathway? Crafting your pathway through a set of resources on your own really prepares you to survive, maybe thrive in a world where most skills today have about a 5-year half-life. When I grew up, I could be pretty sure that my original skills would probably have a 30 or 40-year half-life. Today's students, are going to be faced with the unknown almost all the time. And that's, again, one of the reasons why, how do you learn to play with the system in order to figure out what to do when you don't know? That's what our students ought to be learning today, to feel comfortable in that, to know how to be creative in finding new resources, how to look around the corner, but also look around in general for ways to reuse something, repurpose the fancy word bricolage, Levi-Strauss, in ways that you might never have thought of.
Wow. Gosh, I hate to stop this conversation right now. We are out of time. Tim, do you want to ask any last thing? I'm blown away right now. It's just amazing to hear you share and talk about these things.
So much to think about. Yeah, it's great stuff.
And I'm really, I'm honored by you guys because you are really trying to reinvent what the classroom could be. And in fact, you are preparing your 10, 12-year-olds to thrive in a world of exponential change. You're not preparing them to thrive in a steady state world, always in equilibrium, but rather in a world where the disruptions continuously left, right, and sideways. And how do you feel comfortable with not having to reach for a damn manual to figure out how to operate this newest device? And I hope you teach your kids some humility, because as they deal with the elders, it's nice that they don't dump on us right away.
Well, I can't thank you enough for taking some time away from Maui to talk with us, and we really appreciate this. I know you have a book called The New Culture of Learning. Does that go into more depth than some of the things you're sharing here today?
Well, it does. In fact, the book is the title of the book with Doug Thomas is a little bit of a pun, because the question is a new culture of learning. Everybody says, "Oh, it's a new culture of X, Y, Z, new culture of learning." But we have a very interesting turn of phrase on culture, because what we mean by the new culture of learning, the culture is the culture of a petri dish. So we think of the classroom as being a petri dish, a safe space with boundaries, filled with rich nutrients, where cross-pollination of things are meant to happen and to be explored. And so our ideal is thinking of the classroom as a petri dish. And that's kind of the underlying metaphor. Now, most people read the book. If they only read it once, don't really get that. I mean, we do state it, but that doesn't mean they get it. But that's the spirit of what we're getting at throughout that entire book.
That's brilliant, and that's what I think Tim and I try to live out in our classrooms, and we appreciate you.
Well, my classroom's like a petri dish because it has a lot of germs in it, I think. But
hey, well, look, there's a lot of germs that are good. Don't overlook that.
All right.
Okay. Well, where should people connect with you?
Well, the best obvious site that goes into some of the stuff on things like imagination, etc., is the site of our book, which is just www.newcultureoflearning, all one word, .com. I think. Better check that.
We'll have it in the show notes.
Yeah. No, but it's in my motor knowledge. Let me just type it here. Okay, yes.
Perfect.
And it's a very easy book to read. I mean, it's deceptively easy. That's one problem with it, because it's designed to kind of pull you through it. It's an experiment to actually build a book that it's a very small book, 110 pages, 120 pages, well laid out, by design, by the way. But it's a book that many people end up reading more than once, because kind of you read it the first time and you kind of get the frame, kind of like what happens listening to our little talk right now. But once you get the frame completely, then you go back and read it again, and you start seeing how little pieces fit together in that frame. And so, this ability to build new frames, to unlearn old frames and build new frames, is why I think we got to do much more with kids at all ages of being kids, because kids are building frames. The purpose of the play is to construct the frame. Okay, and they got to be willing to fail. They got to be willing to mess around. They got to be willing to have things not work out right away. They got to kind of be willing to tinker, and pretty soon they start to make sense of the world. Okay, now we all grew up that way, but the trouble is, in today's age, those frames may need to be reframed every 10 years. Okay, and so we got to not only learn how to learn, we may have to learn how to unlearn, or how to reconstruct new frames. And that you do through play.
Wow.
So I think the most fundamental property of our civilization going forward is to know how to reframe. And that ability to reframe comes from certain deep notions of play. And one of the best books on this is something called Homo Ludens, Ludens. It comes from the Latin, man is player, human is player. And I think we got to recognize that schools have been built around Homo sapien, man is knower. And then we modified that with John Dewey, et cetera, to Homo faber, a mankind, a man as maker. And what we're trying to bring back in is it's a triad. It's Homo Ludens, man is player. In a world of constant change, imagination and play is what lets you do the reframe.
Good stuff.
Okay?
So
Great.
powerful.
All
Gosh,
right.
I'm blown away. Thank you again so much, and hopefully we can. I can beg you and bug you enough to get you back on sometime to talk more, because it's truly an honor to talk to you and talk to someone that Tim and I know a tremendous number of teachers respect for your forward thinking on education that's also reflective. So thank you again for coming on today.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
And thanks for watching, Mom and Dad.
Thanks for watching, Mom and Dad.
Yeah. Good.